Welcome to your storytelling. Enjoy the stories, and don't forget to subscribe. I was 22 when I first met Jason. I had no idea that meeting him would change my life forever. He was everything I thought I wanted in a man. Charming, attractive, with a confidence that drew people to him. He had that magnetic personality that made everyone feel special, especially me. From the moment our eyes met across the crowded room at a friend's party, I felt an instant connection. We started talking, and he seemed genuinely interested in me. I told myself he was the one. He wasn't perfect, but no one is, right? I believed the fantasies I built around him, convinced he was the man I was meant to be with. He made me feel like I was his whole world. Looking back now, I wish I had seen the cracks in his facade. I wish I had noticed the way he always danced around his past, never really talking about any exes or close family. But at the time, I just saw the surface, the perfect smile, the attentive words, the way he held my hand like he would never let go. I was in love. Or at least, I thought I was. I couldn't have known how wrong I was. We moved quickly, perhaps too quickly. Jason and I barely knew each other when we decided to become official. I should have slowed things down, but the excitement was too intoxicating. Every moment felt like magic. We went on spontaneous weekend trips, had late-night talks, and laughed about the smallest things. It felt like I had found my soulmate. I remember him pulling me close after a long day, whispering how lucky he was to have me. The affection was overwhelming. I felt cherished, special. But there were little signs, little things that made me uneasy. At times, Jason would be quiet, lost in his thoughts, staring into the distance, as if something bothered him. Whenever I asked, he'd brush it off, say he was just tired or had a rough day at work. I didn't think much of it then. In hindsight, I realize I should have asked more questions, listened more carefully to those unspoken cues. But love made me blind. At that point, I was just so happy to have someone who seemed to understand me. The outside world didn't matter. It was just us, lost in our bubble of bliss. But that bubble, I soon learned, would burst. The first crack appeared almost unnoticed. One evening, Jason was late coming home. It wasn't unusual. He often worked late, and I had grown used to being alone some nights. But when he finally walked through the door, his eyes were wide, a little too wide. He was quick to make excuses. He had stayed after work to finish a project, he said. I didn't question him. That night, though, I noticed his phone was on the table, face down. He never left it unattended like that. A subtle instinct kicked in. I told myself I was being paranoid, imagining things that weren't there. But the unease gnawed at me. When I asked casually the next day if anything had happened at work, his response was a bit too defensive. He told me not to worry about it, that it was just work stress. Still, something in me felt off. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't getting the full truth. I started paying closer attention to his behavior, noticing how his phone would beep in the middle of the night, and how he would quickly silence it and turn away from me. It wasn't like him to hide anything, or so I thought. But I brushed off the growing unease, telling myself that everyone had their own ways of coping with stress. I had no reason to doubt him, right? But the doubts were starting to pile up, and deep down, I knew something was wrong. Over the next few weeks, I noticed more changes in Jason. His once warm demeanor started to feel distant, and his responses to my questions grew shorter. I began to feel like an outsider in our relationship, like he was a different person. The affection we once shared faded, replaced by coldness. He'd disappear for hours, leaving me wondering where he was. But when I asked, he'd give vague answers. The emotional intimacy that had brought us together was slipping through my fingers, and I couldn't figure out why. I'd never felt so alone with someone before. We were together, but it felt like we were worlds apart. The feeling of uncertainty settled over me like a heavy cloud, and no matter how hard I tried to shake it, it remained. The tension between us finally reached a breaking point one night. I couldn't keep ignoring the signs, the strange behavior, the late nights, the secrecy. So, I confronted Jason. I asked him what was going on. He froze, his expression changing from calm to something almost guilty. He denied everything, of course, told me I was imagining things. But I saw the flicker of panic in his eyes. That's when I knew something was off. But I wanted to believe him. I didn't want to accept the possibility that he was lying to me. He promised it was just stress, just work. But I could see through it. Something was wrong. Still, I chose to trust him, convincing myself that I was overreacting. But deep down, I was terrified. As weeks passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that Jason was hiding something. One evening, I was cleaning the kitchen when I noticed his phone on the counter, unlocked. For a split second, I debated whether to look through it. I didn't want to betray his trust, but my curiosity was overpowering. I grabbed it, my heart pounding. I scrolled through the messages, and that's when I found them. Texts from other women, flirtatious texts, promises of "I'll see you soon," and "can't wait for our next date." My stomach turned. The truth hit me like a punch to the gut. He had been lying to me. All this time, I had been blindly trusting him while he was playing games behind my back. The tears came without warning. I couldn't believe it. Jason, the man I thought I loved, had been cheating on me. I felt like the world was spinning out of control. In the days that followed, I couldn't bring myself to confront him about what I discovered. I was in denial, telling myself that maybe I was misinterpreting things. Maybe those texts weren't what they seemed. I searched for excuses, for ways to explain it away. But deep down, I knew the truth. I just couldn't face it. My mind kept replaying the moment I found the messages, and every time it did, my heart broke a little more. Jason had betrayed me, and no amount of denial could change that fact. But I wasn't ready to admit it yet. So, I went on pretending. I acted like everything was fine, keeping up the facade of a perfect relationship, even though the cracks were widening beneath the surface. It wasn't until I caught him again, this time in person, that the truth became undeniable. One evening, I walked into the living room to find Jason on the couch, laughing at something on his phone. When he saw me, he quickly shut it down, his face going pale. I knew in that instant, he was hiding something, and it wasn't just innocent. I demanded to see what was on his phone, but he refused. His defensive reaction only confirmed my suspicions. That's when I finally snapped. The words came tumbling out in a rush, accusing him of everything I'd found out. Jason tried to deny it, but there was no escaping the evidence. I had caught him red-handed. The betrayal hit me harder than anything else. The man I thought I loved, the man I had trusted with everything, had shattered me. The anger came next. It was all-consuming, like a fire burning from the inside out. How could he do this to me? How could he betray my trust like this? I felt like a fool. All the times I had defended him, all the moments I had sacrificed for him, it meant nothing. Jason sat there, his face full of guilt and regret, but I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for him. He had ruined everything. The lies, the deception, the cheating. It was too much to forgive. I told him everything I had been holding inside, everything that had been building up for months. My voice shook with rage, but I couldn't stop. I wanted him to feel the weight of what he had done. I wanted him to know how much he had hurt me. But all he could do was apologize, offer excuses, and beg for forgiveness. I didn't want to hear it anymore. I was done. That night, after Jason left, I sat alone in the apartment, drowning in the aftermath of what had just happened. The house felt empty, silent, like a void. I knew I had to make a decision, whether to stay and try to rebuild the broken pieces of what we once had, or to walk away. The choice seemed impossible, but deep down, I knew the answer. I had already made it. I couldn't stay with someone who had lied to me so easily, who had betrayed my trust so completely. As painful as it was, I knew I had to let go. The love I once had for Jason was no longer there. It had been replaced with anger, hurt, and a profound sense of betrayal. I didn't deserve to live in a lie anymore. The decision was made, and I knew it was the right one. I had to move on. But walking away wasn't as simple as it seemed. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. The days following the breakup were filled with confusion and overwhelming emotions. I kept asking myself if I had made the right choice. Was I just acting out of hurt? Was I too quick to give up on everything we'd built? But deep inside, I knew the truth. Jason had crossed a line, and there was no coming back from that. The pain was unbearable at times, but it was nothing compared to the weight of the betrayal. I spent days in bed, crying, processing what had happened, and slowly starting to heal. The hardest part wasn't losing Jason. It was losing the person I thought he was. He had been a lie, and that realization crushed me. But as the days passed, I began to find my strength. I started doing things for myself, things I had forgotten to do while I was with him. I reconnected with friends, spent time alone, and gradually, the healing process began. It wasn't easy, but it was the only way forward. It wasn't long before the truth about Jason's cheating came to light in ways I never expected. People I had once trusted started revealing the things they knew about his behavior. Friends, acquaintances, even his coworkers. Everyone seemed to have seen the signs before I did. They told me stories of Jason's flirtations, of his multiple relationships with other women while we were together. It all came flooding in. Jason had been playing a game with me, a game that I had no idea I was part of. It was painful to hear, but in a strange way, it also gave me the closure I needed. I wasn't crazy. I hadn't imagined the lies. Everyone else saw it too. And finally, I felt a sense of clarity. The truth was ugly, but it set me free. I found myself obsessively searching for answers, trying to piece together everything that had gone wrong. How had I missed the signs? Was I so blinded by love that I couldn't see the truth staring me in the face? I spent countless hours rehashing every moment, every interaction, trying to figure out where it all fell apart. I reached out to some of his ex-girlfriends, hoping they could shed some light on the man I thought I knew. They all confirmed my worst fears. Jason had been a serial cheater. This wasn't just a one-time mistake. It was a pattern. The realization hit me like a tidal wave. He had been playing me from the start. Every time I thought he was the one, I had been nothing more than another conquest. It was a hard pill to swallow, but at least now I had some clarity. As the days passed, my anger grew. I had given Jason everything, my time, my trust, my love, and he had thrown it all away like it meant nothing. The rage inside me was all-consuming. I wanted him to feel the weight of his actions, to understand the pain he had caused. I didn't just want closure. I wanted justice. I thought about confronting him again, demanding answers, but part of me knew it would just be another round of lies and excuses. No amount of shouting could make him truly understand the hurt he had caused. Instead, I channeled my anger into something productive. I focused on myself. I started working out, focusing on my career, spending time with friends who supported me. It was exhausting, but it was the only way I knew how to deal with the whirlwind of emotions. The anger didn't disappear, but at least it became manageable. Healing isn't linear. Some days, I felt like I was moving on, only to be knocked back down the next. I would wake up, expecting to feel stronger, only to be overwhelmed by waves of sadness. There were moments when I missed Jason, not the person he had become, but the version of him I had fallen in love with. I had to remind myself that I was grieving the loss of a fantasy, not the actual man. The healing process was slow, but I knew I had to keep moving forward. I started therapy, working through my feelings of betrayal, heartbreak, and confusion. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Little by little, I felt like I was reclaiming parts of myself that I had lost while I was with him. It was a painful process, but I knew it was the only way to rebuild my life. It had been months since the breakup when I ran into Jason again. It was the last thing I expected. I was at a coffee shop, sitting with a friend, when I saw him across the room. My heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, I froze. He looked different, somehow, but it was still him. Our eyes met, and he gave me that familiar, almost apologetic smile. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. I felt a rush of emotions, anger, sadness, confusion. I was no longer the woman he had left behind, and I knew it. He stood up, slowly walking toward me. My heart pounded in my chest. Was he going to apologize? Would he beg for forgiveness? I wasn't sure what I wanted from him, but I knew I didn't want to go back. I stood up to face him, my voice steady but firm. Jason stood in front of me, his eyes filled with regret. He apologized, of course. He told me he was sorry for everything, for the lies, the betrayal, and for the way he treated me. He said he had changed, that he had learned from his mistakes. But I didn't believe him. His words felt empty, hollow. I had heard it all before, and nothing he said could undo the damage he had caused. He wanted to know if we could start over, if we could somehow fix things. I looked him in the eye, my heart no longer wavering. "No," I said, my voice calm but resolute. "It's too late." The look of pain on his face was almost satisfying, but it also reminded me of the woman I used to be, the one who had clung to hope despite everything. I wasn't that person anymore. That encounter with Jason felt like a final chapter, but the story wasn't over. It wasn't until weeks later that I fully understood the depth of the damage he had done. I had always believed that closure meant an apology, an explanation. But now, I realized that closure comes from within. It comes from letting go, from accepting that some people aren't meant to stay in your life. I thought I needed Jason to acknowledge his wrongs in order to heal, but the truth was, I was already healing. The final goodbye came quietly, in the moments I spent alone, when I realized I no longer cared about his apology. I had moved on. I was free. I felt like a new person after I let go of Jason. It was as if I had shed an old skin, one that no longer fit me. For the first time in a long while, I was truly at peace with myself. I began to focus on what truly mattered: my growth, my career, and my happiness. I poured my energy into new hobbies, taking up painting and learning a new language. I traveled, saw new places, and met new people. I wasn't looking for love. I was looking for myself, and in the process, I found a strength I didn't know I had. I had been through a storm, but now I was standing tall, ready to face whatever came next. Months passed, and I realized I was no longer haunted by the memory of Jason. His face no longer triggered anger or sadness. Instead, I felt grateful for the lessons I had learned. I knew what I was worth now. I understood that love wasn't about sacrifice or losing yourself. It was about mutual respect and trust. I had been through so much, but it had only made me stronger. I was ready to open myself up to new possibilities, new relationships, but this time, I would do it on my terms. I would never settle for less than I deserved. Jason had broken my heart, but in the process, he had also set me free. And for that, I would always be thankful. Just when I thought I was completely healed, something unexpected happened. I met someone new. His name was Alex, and he was everything Jason wasn't: honest, kind, and real. We hit it off instantly, and for the first time in a long time, I felt hope creeping back into my heart. But this time, I was different. I was no longer that naive woman who blindly trusted. I had learned to trust myself first. Alex was patient, understanding, and gave me the space I needed to heal, even though I had no idea how much I still needed healing. Our relationship wasn't rushed, and it wasn't perfect, but it felt real. For the first time, I wasn't scared of love. I had found a love that was built on a solid foundation, not on lies and deceit. And that made all the difference. With Alex, everything felt different. It was easy to fall into old habits of suspicion, but this time, I promised myself I wouldn't let my past control my future. Trusting someone again wasn't going to be simple, but Alex made it clear he was willing to be patient. We took things slow, and every step forward, no matter how small, felt like a victory. However, one day, I found myself questioning his intentions. A late-night phone call, a text that seemed a little too familiar, it was a trigger for me. But instead of reacting like I had with Jason, I stopped. I chose to have an honest conversation with Alex, something I never did with Jason. To my relief, Alex reassured me, and that was enough. I realized that building trust meant not just opening up, but also letting go of the fear that had been holding me back for so long. Even with Alex's unwavering support, the shadows of my past sometimes crept in. The haunting memories of Jason's betrayal would surface in quiet moments. An offhand comment or a familiar gesture from Alex would remind me of the hurt I had once felt. I had worked so hard to heal, but I hadn't fully addressed the lingering scars. One night, I found myself crying in Alex's arms, sharing everything: my anger, my grief, and my fears that the same thing might happen again. Alex didn't judge me. He listened, patiently, holding me close. It was in that moment that I realized how far I had come. I wasn't the same broken person I was when I met Jason. I was stronger, wiser, and I had learned how to love myself. Alex's understanding was the first step in fully closing the chapter of my past, and it felt like freedom. Forgiving Jason wasn't something I thought I'd ever be able to do. The pain was too deep, the betrayal too raw. But as I continued to heal, I began to understand something important. Forgiveness wasn't for him. It was for me. Holding on to the anger was like carrying a heavy weight on my shoulders, preventing me from moving forward. It wasn't about excusing his actions. It was about releasing the hold they had on my life. One evening, after months of reflection, I wrote Jason a letter, one that I never intended to send. In it, I expressed everything I had been holding inside: the pain, the anger, the loss. But at the end, I wrote a few words of forgiveness. It wasn't easy, but I knew it was the final step I needed to take in order to reclaim my peace. Forgiving him didn't mean I was okay with what he had done. It simply meant I had chosen to stop letting him control my happiness. And in that moment, I felt a sense of liberation. I often found myself reflecting on everything I had been through. My relationship with Jason, the heartbreak, the betrayal, and the eventual healing. It felt like a lifetime ago, yet the lessons were still fresh in my mind. I had changed. I was no longer the same woman who had desperately clung to a love that wasn't real. I had learned to value myself, to recognize my worth, and to set boundaries that protected my heart. It wasn't always easy, but I had emerged stronger. My experiences had shaped me into someone who understood that love wasn't about perfection. It was about trust, respect, and mutual care. I wasn't bitter about my past anymore. Instead, I was grateful for the lessons it had taught me. I was proud of the woman I had become. Months passed, and life began to settle into a rhythm. I had become more focused on my personal goals, my career, my passions, and my friendships. I was content with the way things were, but something unexpected happened one day. I got a message from Jason. I hadn't heard from him since our final confrontation. He apologized again, this time in a more sincere, almost remorseful tone. He admitted to his mistakes, acknowledged the pain he had caused, and said he had been working on himself. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to move on without acknowledging his message. But I couldn't help but wonder if there was something more to his words. After everything we had been through, I felt like I owed it to myself to hear him out. I agreed to meet him, but only for closure. When I met Jason again, he looked different, older, wearier, and for the first time, genuinely regretful. He apologized for everything he had done, admitting that he had been a selfish person who had hurt the people closest to him. I listened quietly, unsure of how to respond. Jason was no longer the man I had once loved, and I wasn't the woman who had blindly trusted him. There was no anger in me anymore, just a sense of peace, a calm detachment that surprised even me. I had forgiven him, not because he deserved it, but because I had let go of the hold he once had on me. I told him that I had moved on, that I was happy with where I was in life. It was a bittersweet conversation, but it felt right. As I walked away from him for the last time, I realized that I had finally closed that chapter of my life, and it felt freeing. Time passed, and life continued to unfold. Slowly, I allowed myself to open up to love again. It wasn't an easy decision, but I knew I was ready. Alex and I grew closer, our bond deepening as we built a relationship founded on trust and mutual respect. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to guard my heart. I knew that love was a risk, but it was a risk worth taking. I had learned the hard way that not all relationships would end in betrayal, and that love, when it was real, could heal. Alex had shown me that. He was patient, kind, and understanding, and I finally felt like I could love again without fear. I wasn't forgetting my past, but I was no longer letting it define my future. I was ready to embrace the possibility of something beautiful and real. What I had with Alex wasn't perfect, but it was real. There were no games, no lies, no manipulations. Just two people who genuinely cared about each other and wanted to build a future together. We had our disagreements, as all relationships do, but we faced them with respect and open communication. We didn't have to pretend to be someone we weren't. With Alex, I could be my true self, flaws, imperfections, and all. And he loved me for it. I had found the kind of love I had always dreamed of, the kind that was built on trust and honesty. It wasn't a fairy tale, but it was something far more precious, something that was real and lasting. And in that love, I found the happiness I had been searching for. Looking back on everything, I realized that the greatest gift Jason had given me wasn't just the heartbreak. It was the freedom. He had shown me what I didn't want in life, and through that, I had discovered what I truly needed. I had learned that love couldn't be forced, that trust couldn't be built on lies, and that my worth wasn't determined by someone else's actions. I was free from the past, free from the hurt, free to live my life on my own terms. I no longer sought validation from anyone else. I had found it within myself. I was whole. And with that freedom, I walked forward into the future, knowing that no matter what came my way, I was strong enough to handle it. As the months went by, I started noticing how much my life had changed. I was no longer haunted by Jason's shadow, nor did I feel the need to look back. I began to embrace a new chapter, one filled with possibilities. I traveled more, explored new passions, and met new people. Each step forward felt like a reclaiming of the woman I had once been, the woman who deserved more than the lies and betrayals. I had been afraid of moving on, but now I welcomed it. It felt like my life was finally mine again. The future seemed bright, and for the first time in a long time, I had no fear of what was coming next. One evening, while reflecting on everything I had gone through, I had a sudden revelation. The pain I had experienced wasn't in vain. It had taught me the importance of self-love, of knowing my worth, and most importantly, of never settling for less. I had spent so much of my life thinking that love was the ultimate goal, that being in a relationship was the key to happiness. But now I realize that happiness comes from within, from knowing who you are and what you stand for. I didn't need someone else to complete me. I had learned to be complete on my own. Jason had taught me that lesson, even though it had come through pain. And for that, I was grateful. It wasn't always easy to keep moving forward. There were days when I felt overwhelmed by everything I had been through. But each time I felt doubt creeping in, I reminded myself of how far I had come. I wasn't the same person who had walked away from Jason, broken and unsure. I was stronger, wiser, and more resilient than I had ever been. I started taking steps toward building the life I wanted. I focused on my career, pushed myself out of my comfort zone, and surrounded myself with people who lifted me up. Happiness wasn't something that happened overnight. It was something I had to actively create. And every little step I took felt like a victory. After months of healing, I finally came to the realization that I had truly moved on from Jason. There was no bitterness left, no longing for the man who had once promised me everything. I had forgiven him, and in doing so, I had freed myself. My life was no longer defined by his actions. I had chosen to move forward, and I was finally at peace with that decision. It wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about accepting it and understanding that it was a part of my journey. I had learned from it, and now I was ready to embrace the future with open arms. Just when I thought my life was on a steady course, something unexpected happened. I received a call from a mutual friend of Jason and me. It had been a while since I had heard from anyone connected to him, and the conversation started off casually. But then, the tone changed. My friend told me that Jason had been trying to reach out, that he was struggling with some personal issues. He seemed lost, unsure of where to go next. At first, I felt nothing. But then, a strange feeling stirred inside me, pity. For the first time, I saw Jason not as the man who had hurt me, but as a broken person who was still dealing with his own demons. It was a brief moment of empathy, but it quickly passed. I had already moved on, and no amount of his struggles would change that. I realized that I had nothing left to give him. My chapter with him was truly over. As the years passed, my life continued to evolve. I had found stability, happiness, and fulfillment in ways I never thought possible after everything I had been through. The relationship with Alex had deepened, and we had grown together. There were still challenges, of course, but we faced them as partners, supporting each other every step of the way. I had learned what it meant to love someone not out of desperation, but out of choice and respect. And most importantly, I had learned to trust again. The pain of my past was no longer a threat to my future. It was simply a chapter that had taught me how strong I really was. Importantly, I had learned to trust again. The pain of my past was no longer a threat to my future. It was simply a chapter that had taught me how strong I really was. One day, as I was sitting in a cafe, I received a message from an unknown number. I hesitated before reading it, but curiosity got the best of me. It was a message from Jason. This time, there were no apologies or pleas for reconciliation. He simply wanted to say that he had thought about me over the years and was glad to see that I was doing well. It was a simple message, but for some reason, it brought back so many emotions. I realized that I had spent so much time worrying about him and what he might think that I hadn't fully appreciated how far I had come. I was no longer the person who had been defined by his betrayal. I was a woman who had built her own life, her own happiness, and her own success. And in that moment, I realized that I had truly closed the door on the past. Jason's message no longer had the power to affect me. It was just another piece of the story that had led me to this point. Looking ahead, I saw the possibilities stretching out before me. There was still so much to explore, so much to experience. I was no longer afraid of the future because I knew I had the strength to face whatever came my way. With Alex by my side, I felt unstoppable. Our love was built on a foundation of trust, respect, and understanding. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And I knew that no matter what, we could handle anything together. The future was ours to shape, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly excited about it. My past had shaped me, but it no longer defined me. I was in control of my own story now. As I walked through life, I realized that the greatest freedom I had gained wasn't just from Jason or the pain he had caused me. It was the freedom to live life on my own terms. I had spent so much of my life tied to someone else's expectations, someone else's dreams. But now, I was free to create my own path, to make decisions based on what felt right for me, not anyone else. The freedom to live authentically, to pursue my passions, and to surround myself with people who truly supported me was priceless. I had learned to love myself, and that made all the difference. Nothing, no one, could ever take that away from me. And here we are, at the end of this journey. A journey that was filled with heartbreak, betrayal, growth, and ultimately, healing. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Each step, each lesson, and each tear led me to the person I am today. I am no longer the woman I was when I met Jason, and I am certainly not the person I was when I walked away from him. I have grown, I have healed, and I have found a love that is true and real. My past may have shaped me, but it does not define me. I have learned that happiness comes from within, and no one else can take that away from me. This is my story, and it is only the beginning after everything. I thought I had finally reached a place of complete closure. But closure isn't always as neat and tidy as we imagine. It's not something that happens in one final moment or conversation. It's a gradual process, a realization that it's time to move on, even if the past still lingers in the background. I looked back at everything I had endured, Jason's betrayal, my heartbreak, the years of healing, and I understood now that closure wasn't about forgetting. It was about accepting that everything happened for a reason. Jason had taught me invaluable lessons, even if it was through pain. But now, I was ready to let go of it all and step into the next chapter of my life. I didn't need answers. I didn't need apologies. I simply needed to live. It was hard not to look back every now and then, to wonder how I might have handled things differently. But I had learned to embrace the growth that came with every setback. The pain was no longer a source of regret, but of strength. I had risen from the ashes of my past, each experience adding layers to who I had become. I realized that life wasn't about perfection, it was about progress. Each day, I worked to become a better version of myself, to create the life I had always dreamed of. There were still challenges, yes, but they no longer defined me. They were just obstacles to overcome on my journey of self-discovery. The woman I had become was someone I was proud of. The love I had with Alex was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't fiery or reckless, but steady and comforting. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. What I had learned from my past relationships, especially Jason, was that love wasn't about grand gestures or idealized notions. It was about compatibility, respect, and deep connection. It was about being able to weather storms together and still come out stronger on the other side. Alex understood me in a way no one else ever had. He knew my fears, my scars, and my dreams, and he loved me despite them. With him, I felt seen, heard, and valued. That was the kind of love I had always longed for, and now, I had found it. Happiness arrived quietly, almost unannounced. It didn't come in the form of a grand celebration or a monumental event. It came in the small moments, the quiet dinners at home with Alex, the walks in the park, the nights spent laughing with friends. Happiness wasn't something I had to chase. It had been within me all along. Once I stopped searching for external validation and started focusing on what truly mattered, I realized how much joy I already had in my life. I had friends who cared about me, a career that fulfilled me, and a partner who loved me unconditionally. The happiness I had been seeking for years had been right in front of me all along. With everything I had learned and the stability I had found in my life, I began to dream again. The future wasn't as daunting as it once had been. Instead of fearing the unknown, I embraced it with excitement. I started planning new adventures, trips to places I had always wanted to visit, new skills I wanted to learn, new goals I wanted to achieve. For the first time in years, I was no longer defined by my past. I was defined by my potential. There was so much more ahead of me, and I was ready to face it. The possibilities felt endless, and I was determined to make the most of them. Life had given me a second chance, and I was going to take it. Through everything I had gone through, the greatest lesson I had learned was the importance of self-love. It wasn't something that could be taught by anyone else. It had to come from within. I had spent so much of my life trying to seek love from others, trying to find validation in relationships, and in the end, I realized that true love had to start with myself. I had to love and accept myself first before I could fully accept love from someone else. And that was what made all the difference. I was no longer the woman who sought approval or confirmation from others. I was confident in who I was, and I knew that I deserved the best. Looking back on everything, I saw how far I had come. The young woman who had once been broken by Jason's betrayal seemed like a distant memory. I had transformed into someone who understood her worth, someone who had learned to stand on her own 2 feet. I had rebuilt my life piece by piece, and with each step, I had become stronger. I had faced my fears, healed my wounds, and emerged from the darkness into the light. Jason's betrayal had been a catalyst for change, but it had not been the defining moment of my life. It had merely been a chapter, and now that chapter was over. The circle was complete. Every ending is a new beginning, and I realized that my journey was just getting started. I had learned the hard way that life doesn't always go as planned, but it still offers beauty and joy in unexpected places. I was no longer afraid of the future. I was ready to embrace it with open arms. With Alex by my side, the man who had stood by me through it all, I knew that together, we could face whatever came our way. The past had shaped me, but it no longer controlled me. I was free to create my own destiny, to build the life I wanted. And this time, I would make sure it was everything I had ever dreamed of. It was in moments of quiet reflection that I realized the true peace I had found. It wasn't just in the absence of drama or conflict, but in the acceptance of who I was, flaws, scars, and all. I had finally made peace with my past, and more importantly, I had made peace with myself. I wasn't perfect, and I no longer tried to be. I embraced my imperfections and used them as the foundation for my growth. I had finally learned that peace wasn't something I had to search for. It was something I had to create from within, and I had done just that. And so, the story ends. Or perhaps it's just the beginning of another chapter, one that is still being written. The woman I am today is not the woman I was when I met Jason. I have learned, I have loved, I have lost, and I have healed. But through it all, I have found strength, resilience, and the ability to love myself. I will continue to face the world with the same courage and determination that carried me through the darkest days. The journey may not be over, but I am no longer afraid of what comes next. I am ready for whatever life has in store, because I know, no matter what happens, I am strong enough to handle it.